So very thankful for Gary and stepping in the last couple of weeks while we've been gone. And these studies have been interesting. I'll tell you, I started to look at this one and I wasn't really interested until I got into it. And then it became really interesting. So this week in Good Lessons from Bad Guys, we're going to look at Acts chapter 19. And we're going to be looking at this character named Demetrius. And this guy's a troublemaker here for sure. I like the opening that Dewey wrote for this. He talks about somebody in my past I hadn't thought of in a while. Not in my past, in our country's past. And that's Paul Revere. It's interesting to know. Of course, as soon as I saw the name Paul Revere, I had stopped and Google Paul Revere and read some encyclopedia articles about him and brush up on my knowledge and memory of what he did and how it impacts us. And the main thing is really nobody's heard of Paul Revere until after the famous poem was written, and I think it was in 1861 when that poem was written. And even though the legend of Paul Revere is around 1775, the poem was written in 1861 by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and he made this character really famous in history, and probably exaggerated a bit about what happened. I mean, what he did was important, but I discovered that most likely he didn't even fulfill the plans they had for him. He was stopped at a certain point on his mission. He didn't get to accomplish, he didn't get to alert all the townspeople that he wanted to, and that they had asked him to do. But still, others carried on, and of course we know we were successful in the Revolutionary War. And so Dewey writes this to introduce this lesson. He says, Paul Revere is best known for a midnight ride he took to alert American colonists of the approaching British forces before the Battle of Lexington and Concord. He was an American silversmith, engraver, and early industrialist in the American colonies. While he was not among the first to actively oppose the tyranny of the British Crown over the colonies, he was soon motivated to join their ranks and became a member of the Sons of Liberty, actively working against British rule and taxation. What does it take to stir up people? Sounds like a pretty relevant question. Right?
Not much.
Not much, not these days, right? Maybe not ever, really, when you think about it. Many American colonists were incited into taking up arms against British authority, even while many of their neighbors opposed such insurrection. What causes are worth standing up for, and which are better to be left alone? Perhaps equally important is to look into the motives of those who are doing the inciting. Are their motives for stirring others into action noble, or are they motivated by selfish or self-serving reasons? The bad guy in this session was also a silversmith. He was adept at inciting others and stirring them into a frenzy of violent action. His reasons for doing so, however, were less noble. What can we learn from this man that will prevent us from, one, following his example of manipulating others for self-serving goals, and two, from being manipulated into taking on a cause that does deserve our attention or does not deserve our attention and energy? So let's go to Acts chapter 19. We're going to read verses 23 through the end of the chapter. All right, about that time, there arose a great disturbance about the way. A silversmith named Demetrius, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought in no little business for the craftsmen. He called them together along with the workmen in related trades and said, Men, you know we receive a good income from this business, and you see and hear how this fellow Paul has convinced and led astray large numbers of people here and in practically the whole province of Asia. He says that man-made gods are no gods at all. There is danger not only that our trade will lose its good name, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be discredited, and the goddess herself, who is worshipped throughout the province of Asia and the world, will be robbed of her divine majesty. When they heard this, they were furious and began shouting, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! Soon the whole city was in an uproar. The people seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia, and rushed as one man into the theater. Paul wanted to appear before the crowd, but the disciples would not let him. Even some of the officials of the province, friends of Paul, sent him a message begging him not to venture into the theater. The assembly was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing, some another. Most of the people did not even know why they were there. The Jews pushed Alexander to the front, and some of the crowd shouted instructions to him. He motioned for silence in order to make a defense before the people. But when they realized he was a Jew, they all shouted in unison for about 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." The city clerk quieted the crowd and said, "Men of Ephesus, doesn't all the world know that the city of Ephesus is the guardian of the temple of the great Artemis and of her image, which fell from heaven? Therefore, since these facts are undeniable, you ought to be quiet and not do anything rash. You've brought these men here, though they have neither robbed temples nor blasphemed our goddess. If, then, Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a grievance against anybody, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. They can press charges. If there's anything further you want to bring up, it must be settled in a legal assembly. As it is, we are in danger of being charged with rioting because of today's events. In that case, we would not be able to account for this commotion since there is no reason for it." After he had said this, he dismissed the assembly. Boy, does that sound familiar. So, what's going on here? Paul's in his third missionary trip here. He's in Asia, he's in Ephesus, and he's been there at this point now for about the full 2 years that he spends there. So he's coming to the end. In fact, in the verses right before, he's already talking about leaving this area and heading on and getting back to Jerusalem. So he's been there for a couple of years. He's been preaching the gospel. He's got quite a discipleship now following him, people following him, others that are teaching now as well. Probably part of the reason why he can go. They've got a church established, they made disciples, and the work's been very fruitful there. So fruitful that the guys who make all these silver shrines of their god, Artemis, what's Artemis's other name? Does anybody remember? Diana or Diane? Diana. Okay, so it's the Princess Diana. She was, I guess in Greek mythology, she was Apollo's twin sister. And she was the goddess of the hunt and the goddess of pregnant women. And, you know, those Greek gods had a lot of roles. They had a lot of things covered. But they had, Ephesus is a major city. 300,000 plus population for that time period in history. Very, very significant. That's a huge city. That's probably more like 3 million people in the city today. It's a big deal. And so they're having such an impact that this, I guess you could call it almost like a silversmith union, more or less, a guild. These guys all work, building these or creating these shrines, creating little miniature statues, and they've got this giant temple. The temple of Artemis, the temple of Diane, this tribute to her is one of the 7 wonders of the world. This place is enormous. I saw lots of different measurements, but it's like the biggest estimates were that it was 450 feet long, 240 feet wide, 6 stories tall, these columns. Now, it suffered just about complete destruction at least 3 times and was rebuilt 3 different times, or 2 different times. The last time it was destroyed, they left it. And if you go to Turkey, which is where this Ephesus is back then, and to look for the ruins, there's like 2 columns, half their height sticking up, and just some rubble, some leftover steps. There's not much there to see. But at the time, people traveled from around the world to come see this temple. And not only did these guys make money through selling all these little shrines and stuff, but people came and gave offerings to Artemis, to Diana. And so there was a lot of money brought in through the temple because people would come and say, we want to give to Artemis. And so there's a lot of cash around this religion, this worship of these Greek gods and of Artemis. So it's a pretty significant effect. These disciples that Paul has made has caused people to question: do we need to keep worshiping this Artemis? Maybe we need to worship this Jesus. And so now it's affecting his pocketbook. So what do we see happening here? What's his strategy? What do you think is really driving Demetrius here?
Money.
Money. You think that's his prime?
He says it.
He does.
Yeah, and that's how he's recruiting his fellow silversmiths.
Yeah. Yeah, when you start touching somebody's pocketbook, it has an effect. And it's certainly a great way to, incite a group of people. It seems like this thing escalated pretty quickly, did it not? It seems like when riots happen, if you've got a really good chant, right? There's been a bunch of them. Some of them you can't repeat. Over the last year we've experienced, but it looks like, everybody got into this great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And so they're all chanting, they're screaming. It seems like there's a lot of unity. It seems like everybody's on the same page here. Or are they?
Some of them didn't even know why they were there.
Somebody didn't even know. They're just like running out of the house. Riot, riot, woo! and people just join in, right?
It's like when there's a fight at school, somebody goes, fight, and everybody runs. They don't know who's fighting, they don't know anything, and then in the middle of it.
And they start fueling it. How many fights would even come to full fruition if the crowd didn't jump in and start chanting and motivating? And it's like shaking up the bugs in the jar to get them to fight, right? It's like, yeah, that's an excellent example. Most of the people did not even know why they were there, but boy, they were mad. It's almost to the point where it makes me wonder if I'm in with the whole crowd, if I'm in with a group of people and I'm thinking the same things that the group is thinking, it instantly makes me think, wait a minute, what's going on here? Am I being influenced by this group? What is it about the power of a crowd? Oh, anonymity. I'm in a crowd, I'm with a large group of people, but I don't stick out individually. Okay? What is it about the crowd that makes you want to join in? Or makes it so tempting to? What is that?
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure, okay. Yeah, that sense of belonging. These are my people. This is my community. I trust old Tom over here. He's a smart guy, and if he's rioting, it's probably a good thing. Maybe I should just join in and trust that Tom knows what he's talking about. Then Tom looks over and sees Doug and thinks, uh-oh, am I in the wrong group? In the wrong side of this one? That guy's kind of a loudmouth.
But even like at a concert, he's got the leader, the singer, the whatever, saying the words and everybody repeats, it really, you've got to have a leader, you've got to have people, because of the concert, everybody's favorite. And yet they've got that one voice towards all the wrong.
Yeah, and they unite, don't they? Mm-hmm. And how many times at concerts people start singing the songs, right? And the singer holds the mic out and everybody else is singing the words and everybody, together. And everybody's moving. 50,000 people. And they all got their phones up and they're all moving in rhythm, except for Doug. Doug's going opposite. He might have no rhythm. But they're all moving together. It's like, how did we get all these people on the same page? Didn't even plan it. It just happened. How serious is this riot?
Yeah.
It's serious. In fact, there are some who say that when Paul is referencing in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8 through 10, that he's referencing what's happening to them right here in this riot. And he says, "We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about the hardships we suffered in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. Indeed, in our hearts, we felt the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us." They were at a point of desperation, so much so that they thought, we're liable to get killed here. We're liable to die. And it's interesting what Paul says. He's like, but we knew that God can resurrect the dead. It seems like Paul's literally thinking, we were in this spot and we thought if we get killed and God needs us to keep working, he's just going to raise us from the dead and keep going. That's some dedication, is it not? And yet, I think what's really great about this story, and this is the part that caught me, and it's just because of what we're going through right now, and because we have such disunity in this country. There's so much going on, and I know sometimes it just feels like you don't even, for me, I don't even know what to pray for anymore. But I know I can look at this story and I know that I can trust God. What happens in this story? Do we see God actively intervening here? We don't. Who intervenes to help?
The city clerk.
The city clerk. The city clerk is somebody, I had to look this up. The city clerk in this situation is the highest elected official in a particular province or city. So they're a Roman authority, and they're probably the highest authority in that region. So this is the person who's probably kind of like the mayor or something like that office. The other people who reached out to help Paul and give him some advice saying, don't go to the theater, you need to stay away. Those were also Romans. They were not necessarily disciples. They were called, I can't remember the name, I can't remember how to pronounce it, so I'm going to try. But those were more Roman religious leaders, those who were trying to make sure that people were worshiping Caesar and paying homage to Rome and to Caesar and to all that. So you have the city clerk intervening and reminding them, we have legal means. If there's something here that you need to file a claim or file a grievance or file charges on, we've got processes for that. And if you guys keep rioting, Rome's going to come down on us. And Ephesus was known as one of the major cities of freedom within Rome. Not all cities had as much freedom as Ephesus had. And the people there valued that freedom, and they did not want to give that up. But if Rome had to come in and shut this riot down, start charging people, throw people in prison and stuff, they were going to bring tighter restrictions on Ephesus. So they didn't want that.
Well, not only that, he kind of cuts the head off the snake, because he calls out Demetrius by name.
Oh yeah.
And his fellow craftsmen.
Yeah.
So Demetrius didn't have anonymity with the crowd.
That's true. He lost his name. Yeah, he got it all started.
Mm-hmm.
But then when was he looking at the big riot and going, uh-oh? I bet he was when the city clerk stood up and started talking about, Rome's going to come down on us, and charge us with inciting a riot if we don't get this under control. He might have been thinking twice, like, oh, I went too far here.
Yeah, and who might have overseen the election of this official in the city? Who oversees our elections today? Does God appoint the people that rule over us?
Yeah.
So God may have probably seen that the right man is in the right place at the right time. This time.
can be kind of a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
It depends on how you think of it. Because it's disappointing for people, to be rulers to destroy something that these people let them.
Yeah. And I think we know that God's gonna hold everybody accountable for, for the things that he expects from them,
Next week, we can talk about did he appoint Hitler?
Yeah. Woo! Well, let's go into that a little bit. Let's go to Romans chapter 13. I can't tell you how many times I've quoted Romans on Facebook in the last few months. Let's go to Romans and let's look at the first 5 verses of chapter 13. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authority, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. It says that twice. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you. For he is God's servant to do you good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant and an agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also because of conscience. Let's flip over to 1 Timothy chapter 2. Should turn these out over time. 1 Timothy chapter 2, the first 2 verses. I urge then, first of all, that all requests, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. This is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants all men to be saved. Okay, and then I added one here, 1 Peter chapter 2. Verses 13 through 17. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Live as free men, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as servants of God. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the brotherhood of believers. Fear God. Honor the king. It's interesting that we could look at this time and think that things are so bad right now. What was happening when Paul wrote Romans, a letter to the Romans? Who was Caesar at that time? Anybody know? It was Nero. Nero, considered the worst of the Caesars, who did unspeakable things to his own people, burns the city of Rome, and then conveniently blames it on Christians, and then turns the torture and attack of Christians into sport, into entertainment, into utility. I mean, skinning an animal, putting those skins on a Christian, and then releasing wolves onto that Christian in an arena so people can be entertained. Burning Christians at the stake while the crowd cheers. Taking Christians and strapping them to poles and setting them up around the town and lighting them on fire to be the light for their streets when the sun goes down. That's what was going on when the book of Romans was written. When Paul said, submit yourself to every authority, because God established that authority.
And yet he said, I appeal to Caesar, because he trusted what would happen once he got there. And how did you trust that leader?
He trusted that he was going to be, handled appropriately through Roman law, right? I think he probably trusted that God was going to take care of him more than anything. But look what happened as a result of Paul being house arrested in Rome. What happened?
Oh,
He wrote the majority of his writings that we have today. He had the time. He got to teach every day. People came and gathered around him, and he got to teach large groups of people in the most powerful city in the world at that time. He got these audiences. The effect is immeasurable. Paul wasn't afraid to use his Roman citizenship. He wasn't afraid to say, I've got some rights here. And he took advantage of that. But because he allowed God to work through him, look what he was able to accomplish.
He might have been sent to help those families understand that better, who had lost family members that were burned on torch to give out to this maybe. Who knows what they were thinking? They might have been thinking, and so he just said God appointed Caesar. For what good reason did he do that?
This seems like the kind of teaching that was just as hard to hear as Jesus saying, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood.
Yeah.
This is the kind of teaching that, separates the chaff from the, what's that expression? The chaff from the wheat, right?
Well, that's really hard for me to reconcile, that God appoints people to see over us who act that way. But my best vernacular parallel or comparison to that might be, I've already talked about this before. If you've ever played cards, what do you do with the cards that you're dealt?
Play those.
Play the cards. I don't want to compare God to a card dealer, but he might be the one who deals with cards. And he's not surprised at the cards that he deals to us. And they'll talk about our gifts this morning. We're supposed to play our hand.
Yeah.
Now, for America, that's kind of difficult to think that somebody else gives us our hand, but that is what it looks like.
I think the bell either rang or is about to ring. I definitely want to touch on one of the major points that the author in this book brings up. He says, this is a quote, "Please note that Paul and his missionary team did not take on a campaign to remove Artemis worship from the Ephesians. They sought to instill Christ Jesus into the hearts of the individual Ephesians. Once these disciples started living transformed lives, they began to change some of their daily practices, which started to impact the culture. It impacted the economy. It impacted that community. We need to believe that the gospel has that power and has that power today. While we want to fight for things that are right, while we want to support our freedom in this country, we've got to remember that God planned for us to do certain things. He planned for us to accomplish certain things based on the gifts and talents and the situation that we're in, the cards that we've been dealt. Teresa always reminds me that God gives us the things that we need for these particular situations. And so it's easy to get caught up in the big movement, the big chant, the big riot, to stand for what's right. And I'm not saying that we're not to stand up to things that are wrong and evil. We know that we're not to do things. If our government were to command us to do things that we know are wrong, we're not going to do those things. And I just wrote down some quick examples. Exodus 1, and the midwives were told to kill all the male babies, right? Did they do that? Nope. Joshua and the prostitute Rahab, and she lied, and she didn't turn in the spies. She was blessed because of that. The book of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't worship. They were thrown into the furnace and they were saved. Daniel did not pray to the king, Nebuchadnezzar. He prayed to God. He went against those orders. Peter and John were arrested and told, stop preaching, stop doing this stuff. And they said, who are we going to listen to, you or God, right? Even John mentions in the book of Revelation that there will be those who will worship the Antichrist because he will demand worship. And God instructs us specifically that we are not to do that. So there might be things that a government or an entity or an authority tells us to do that, and we've got to weigh those things. We've got to weigh our motivations. We've got to look to God's word to find our place in this time and find out what it is that he's asking us to do. So if we're going to stir people up, can we stir them up for the right reason? Can we stir them up for a message of saving and for a message of truth as opposed to what people are getting stirred up for right now? Let's try to do that. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate your comments. Appreciate you being here this morning. It's a quick class. I'm sorry. Got started a little late.
Thank you, Doug.
And thank you for everyone online. Appreciate y'all being here. I hope it was worthwhile for y'all too.